welcome to Biota Live. I'm Tom Barbalet, and this is recorded live on TalkShoe on August 21st, 2009. Biota Live is a continuation of the Biota podcasts. For more information on the Biota podcasts, check out biota.org/podcast. And for those interested in calling in, the best way to get the call-in details is also via biota.org/podcast. The next episode on September the 4th at 8 p.m. Pacific, post-singular and post-apocalyptic. This is a topic which has come up because the Singularity Summit is occurring in New York City in October, and I thought September was an ideal month to somewhat debunk, somewhat cover, somewhat analyze, somewhat discuss the singularity movement and whether artificial life developers are post, pre, or just plain non-singular, and also with regards to the current economy and I think the relatively abysmal situation that most of us face in terms of employment. Those of us that are working seem to be losing working conditions. Those of us that aren't working seem to just be losing conditions full stop. So a number of topics associated with that kicking off next Biota Live September the 4th. I'm talking with Mark Biota currently about doing a special Biota Live at some time other than the Friday at 8 p.m. Pacific time. Mark is doing a lot of traveling currently, and he would like to be on a Biota Live. He'd like to talk about a number of the issues that have been discussed, particularly associated with the International Society of Artificial Life, and also working out ways that the International Society can kind of broaden its membership. I think the general narrative associated with what's been going on recently is that the artificial life community is quite diverse. It doesn't just exist in academia. It doesn't just exist as hobbyists. A number of different folk, and also those in industry, and really coaxing the folk who are developing artificial life in industry into the broader communication is going to be one of the primary topics. So if you remember the last time Mark Biota was on Biota Live, it's going to be a continuation of that discussion, but primarily focusing on the International Society of Artificial Life and what the International Society will be doing in the future. Obviously, the current financial situation internationally and the effect on software engineers, be they professional software engineers, researchers, students, etc., folks who develop artificial life, either professionally or as a hobby, the conditions are pretty appalling currently. So it's going to be an interesting discussion. I will announce when Mark Biota is on specifically. I just see Steve Grand in the chat, so hopefully he'll be calling in a minute. So I'll announce that through the Biota Conversations mailing list. In order to get to that mailing list, go to the Biota site, click mailing lists at the top, and you'll get to the Biota Conversations. And I recommend if you regularly listen to this podcast that you subscribe to the Biota Conversations mailing list, because it's a very useful way of getting information and also continuing the discussion from every Biota Live conversation. So I had mentioned in previous Biota Lives that I'd be heading to Northern California in mid-September. However, unfortunately, I had to cancel that trip. I cancelled it for a number of reasons. Bruce Damer will probably not be in California when I'm there, and obviously I wanted to do some work with Bruce in addition to giving a talk at Grayson, Silicon Valley. It's pretty expensive, actually, to get to the Bay Area currently, so I just wanted to kind of, in these times, minimize my travel with the view that when Bruce is definitely going to be in the Bay Area, I would head back and do a Grayson, Silicon Valley talk. As I mentioned at the start of the show, there is going to be a lot of post-singularity, or whether we should even engage in the discussion at all, related conversation on Biota Lives coming up in the future. But I think the narrative associated with the contemporary singularity movement is quite distinct to what we've been discussing in Biota Live to date. And I have the pleasure of unmuting Steve Grant. Hello, Steve.
Hey, Tom. How you doing?
Pretty good, pretty good. So you've come to Biota Live in the news and notes, and I was just discussing the Singularity Summit that's going to be going on in New York in October. What's your view with regards to the Singularity movement?
Is it a movement? I haven't seen much movement towards the Singularity. It's just all hot air as far as I can see. It's well, I think it's pretty damaging in terms of PR for the artificial intelligence movement. That's for sure.
Certainly. I think also it's pretty damaging for artificial life developers because there's kind of a certain level of astroturf which one needs to overcome, particularly if, one's doing any kind of development. There's always the compare and contrast, and there's the kind of loud megaphone broadcast system that seems to be attached to the singularity movement. So, certainly I've had discussions through the community, many of these discussions you've been a part of in some regard, about whether we need to be proactive in terms of our kind of anti towards the singularity. Is this your sense currently?
It's very difficult to know what to do for best about it. If you look at the creationist movement and the backlash against that by science, it's not necessarily been a good thing that we've been fighting creationism. It has in general, but it's also kind of given them some kudos that they otherwise didn't deserve. And I think that's partly true for the singularity movement as well, that a lot of the stuff that they say is just such sheer nonsense that we shouldn't even bother talking about it. But it's not all bad. Some of the work that's being done in connection with singularity, and I'm thinking of the only connection I've ever had with those people is I went to a workshop in Washington some years ago that Ben Goertzel organized. And that was pretty good fun. I enjoyed that. It was very symbolic top-down AI, but at least Ben was trying to do some general intelligence work instead of all this highly specific, good old-fashioned AI stuff. So it's not all bad, but I think Kurzweil and all this doomsaying is a dangerous thing, and the public picks up on it very quickly.
Very much so. Yeah, very much so.
I seem to spend half my time trying to put those things right, by giving lectures and things about how AI is a complete failure. I have to go to the opposite extreme, really, and say how dreadful it all is and how badly we've done. Someone says Hugo's the only doomsaying one. Well, that's true to some extent. Certainly Hugo has a pretty negative attitude to these things. He'll be in charge when the revolution happens. But just the general idea that we're heading towards a singularity and superhuman intellect from machines is just absurd at the moment. There's no evidence for it whatsoever. We don't have any AI. AI is a complete failure. It's not succeeded in doing what Alan Turing said it would have done by the turn of the century. And it's about time we sort of put that story straight, I think.
So we have a caller from California on the line as well. Hello, caller from California.
Hello, it's Bruce Damer calling in.
Hi, Bruce.
Oh, hey, Bruce.
Hello.
So, Bruce, you come into the news and notes, but you've actually had the benefit of looking into the whites of their eyes, or at least the whites of their children's eyes with regards to the singularity movement. What's your sense of the contemporary singularity movement?
Well, from what I can see, there's like a split occurred sometime last year between Singularity Institute and Singularity something or other, i.e. a group kind of went off on its own without Ray, and then the Singularity University got started at Ames. And I kind of hummed and hawed whether or not I wanted to have any association with it. And then several friends said, "Oh, we're going down to do talks there. At least you can talk about what you're working on." And so I put my hand up in the spring and said, I'd be happy to do a talk on space or the history and the evolution of computing or the Evo grid or whatever. And they're pretty enthusiastic and came back and said, "Put in a proposal." So I put in a proposal and I did the talk, I think, on July 8th. Down at NASA Ames in front of a very, very energetic group of mostly young people that I was very impressed by.
And in terms of the crowd, as they kind of lap up around you after the talk, did you get a sense of what they're doing or why they're there, more importantly?
Well, it seems as though, and I asked one of the organizers, I said, look, in my talk, I may be talking about why I agree with Steve Brand and that there is no such thing as a singularity. It's a concept from science fiction, and there it remains in science fiction. And they said that's absolutely fine. I mean, Ray is not setting the agenda, and you can talk about what you want to talk about. So I did a sort of sweep of computing history starting with the Colossus, which I just visited in Bletchley Park, and Tony's sale, they had booted it up, and I watched it run, and then I went over to the Institute for Advanced Study and looked at the von Neumann and Oppenheimer archives. And as you know, I've been tracking the history of computing for some time, and I actually, about 8-9 years ago, Ray Kurzweil hired me to generate statistics on GPU and CPU performance increases over 25 years, which I dutifully did, and I dutifully also wrote an essay that I submitted along with the data to him. This was for the Singularity book he was working on. And the essay said, Ray, this is meaningless stuff. I can give you numerous examples of why it's meaningless and why the Xerox Star workstation of 1981, as far as the user is concerned, is pretty much equivalent to a computer of 2003, but it has a processor 1/1000th as powerful. But still, the entire space has been filled by other junk, and that there hasn't been substantial progress, certainly in the operating system sphere. Just many layers added, but no singularity about to occur in computing that I could see.
So we have William R. Buckley on the line as well. Hello, William.
Hello. How are you guys doing?
Pretty good. We've got Steve Grand and Bruce Damer on the call already.
Well, I've recognized Bruce, but I haven't heard Steve. Hello.
Hey, nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
So, I mean, could you predict when you gave Kurzweil back your graph, could you predict, N-core processors or any of these kind of things, Bruce?
Yeah, at that time, and this is the EvoGrid project is based on the assumption that we were going to go into an N-core multiscalar, really not much faster in clock rate, but really a lot more cores. And what's interesting is of course, when Danny Hillis designed the thinking machine, the connection machine in the late 1980s, the question was, what on earth do we do with all these processors? And, of course, Carl Sims and his evolving blocky creatures was one thing. But when you have hundreds of cores, you can certainly use them very well in a GPU and game graphics chipsets. A GPU or a core could be used to drive every pixel on the screen, basically. So there's a use for it. There's certainly a use in the EvoGrid project itself because we just need as much computing as we can, trillions of molecules. But, at that time, I basically was saying, I was cautioning Ray not to just make assumptions from either the clock rate increase or the number of CPUs. Because basically I was agreeing with Jaron Lanier when he wrote Half a Manifesto about the same time, saying that we're really pretty bad as a species at writing software, and if we expect software to write itself, we're doubly fooled. And if we expect software to write itself and create a model of something called consciousness, which we don't even understand, we're triply fooled.
Can I come in there? It's always struck me that Moore's law is and I think Bruce is saying this, that Moore's law is more or less irrelevant because the limiting factor in computer science has never been the speed of processors. It's been our ability to handle that speed and, in particular, the design of languages. So it's been the evolution of computer languages that's been the bottleneck in how we use computers, not the speed of the processor. And our ability to think. I mean, if we gave Kurzweil and co. a computer now that was 100 million times faster than anything that exists and 100 million times bigger than anything that exists, would it suddenly get up and walk and start being intelligent? I mean, how are they going to program it to do that? We still just don't have a clue how to do that yet.
And I jump in here as well and just conclude with, so I presented the sweep of computing history at the Singularity University session, and then the EvoGrid project, which on the face of it is very much kind of something that would interest them. although it's in a sense trying to get emergence from the lowest possible level, and even pre-emergence, or I would call it pre-evolution. And they were really enthused. I think that they'd had a huge smorgasbord of different talks. Everyone from Google to Second Life, Philip Rosedale there, to all kinds of things. They were getting really superb speakers. I mean, they were getting world-class talks. But this one, some of them came up to me at the end and said, "This is a really fundamentally interesting thing to us." And I got the sense of was that none of them have the whites in the eyes, sort of passionate following the singularity idea. There were a couple of extropians there from the extropian movement, but for the most part, they were just bright young people able to absorb a huge amount of information. They're in their project phase now, and they're building some kinds of project. But I'm not sure that the entire anything to do with the singularity was that much discussed that I could see, or at least raise science fiction idea of it.
So, Steve, you've listened to previous Biota Lives, and particularly previous Biota Lives that related to the Evo grid. As we have the benefit of Bruce on the call, as you listened to the previous Biota Lives, you had some concerns associated with the Evo grid. Can you kind of distill them and pose them to Bruce as questions or possible problems?
Well, I can try, but I'll be talking out of my hat because I've only listened to a little bit of this, and I'm not really up to speed with what's going on.
Well, do you want Bruce to give an introduction of maybe 3 or 4 minutes, which you can talk to? Would that be easier?
Sure, why not? Go ahead, Bruce.
Well, Steve, in fact, a lot of what we're doing is inspired by some of the writings you did, I think about a year ago, about ratcheting. And initially, the project started out as came from Dick Gordon, actually. Dick Gordon's chapter in the book, that both Tom and I contributed to. And
in fact, Steve contributed as well. Yes,
Steve, you contributed that too. Well,
I did, yeah.
Dick's chapter was Hoyle's tornado artificial origin of life, and basically challenging techies like us to say, don't create an artificial life form, sort of, don't design something, start from the real basic stuff and let particles interact, or some really, really low-level atomic process start and run en masse, and don't touch it and see what emerges. And you're probably not going to see little swimming machines, but you may understand the emergence of emergence. You may understand that structures can form in space, and things can run like little catalytic reactions through time. You can get sequences through time or structures in space. And do those ever go to Darwinian natural selection? They might. If there's autocatalytic sets and things, they might. But just go back to basics. So I took that on as a challenge, which is also the subject of my PhD work. And we've got a whole team going. We selected in January. Went through 2 or 3 molecular dynamics simulators that are offered. They're used in chemistry and biochemistry, and we picked GROMACS from the University of Groningen and the Max Planck Institute. And it's amazing. It scales across grids. It can do hundreds of millions of particles, if not billions, and has 10 years of development, and it's open source. So what we did by May is we built an engine around it. What we're trying to do is not only run GROMACS and run the atoms and get them to form bonds and get those resultant molecules to form other structures. What we're trying to do is build a widget that will look at the simulation, i.e. multiple widgets will look at the simulation pool, decide in that pool where there's something interesting going on by some definition, and throw more processors at it or throw more compute simulation space at it to allow it to track itself out a little bit more, and then basically feedback and say, here's more compute space for this little patch where vesicles seem to be forming. Now, we could be completely fooling ourselves, but I think of it as a shortcut to emergent complexity within this massive pool. And what we're going to do, in fact, I've hired a graduate student in South Asia. She's modifying the BOINC grid, which runs SETI at home, such that we can hopefully sequester a few 100,000 or a million computers to do the searching for the patterns of interesting stuff. So anybody could write their own analyzer that pokes around in this huge database of particles and decides to feed back information. It's almost like SETI at home upside down, and that we're looking for signs of emergent complexity within our own little cosmos instead of looking at radio astronomy data from outside. So that's sort of a one-breath nutshell of the project as it stands. So we've built the feedback loop. We've run GROMACS in iteration without crashing multiple times, formed bonds, stuffed it all back into GROMACS. It runs at another 1,000 cycles and then dumps out again. And now the analyzer is being written. So there you have it.
Phew. It's a great project, and I talked briefly to Dick about it when I met him a while back. And I looked at the code, and see, I don't know GROMACS, so I don't know what level of abstraction it uses. So you can maybe tell me I'm wrong here. But one of the things that sort of troubled me about it was the scale problem. That you may be 5 orders of magnitude out in terms of the number of molecules you can actually afford to simulate. Because if you take, let's say, usually it's a reasonable guess to say that Avogadro's number per gram molecule is the number of molecules we're talking about. So say you had a soup of enzymes with a molecular mass of 1,000, then that's 6 times 10 to the 23 molecules per kilogram, which is 6 times 10 to the 11 molecules per picogram. So even the cell has got a hell of a lot of molecules in it. A hell of a lot. And if you're going to try modeling those down at the quantum or near quantum level, you're essentially going to be using all the computing systems on Earth just to model the tiniest little corner of a cell somewhere. And
You're absolutely correct, Steve. And in fact, we sort of hit this realization early on, and I sequestered about 20 advisors for the project, people from biochemistry, from origin of life studies, and they came back because I wanted to say, what are we doing? What value is this? And that we can only, with a large computing blue gene array, we could probably simulate a cubic centimeter of water, maybe. And what they said, if you're lucky, a number of them said, look, you don't have to stick religiously to the chemistry. Now the chemists are saying, please stick to the chemistry. It'll give us a tremendous tool if you can make such a grid work. But they're saying, look, develop toy universes, and this is what Freeman advised me to do. Develop toy universes, toy models. What you care about is the emergence. You care about the complex structures coming out. Penny Boston was really clear on this. She's a biologist that studies extremophiles in caves. And she said, look, the chemists are always going to want you to be faithful to chemistry, but you're going to need an entire planet to do what you're trying to do. So do really abstract universes. Cut corners. All you care about is showing that complex structures can emerge, and they can emerge beyond just one level. They can ratchet up through multiple levels of complexity. Do an abstract, basically, and this comes into Bill and, of course, what Tom has been talking about. Do a cellular automata chemistry or chemical automata. Do something that is really tooled down computing-wise, but can still show the ratcheting complexity through time.
Yeah, I think you're going to have to do that. You're going to have an abstract chemistry. But it's quite important to think about what kind of chemistry that is. Biology has really got three classes of chemistry involved: energetic chemistry, computational chemistry, and molecular biology. And energetic chemistry and computational chemistry are relatively similar. You could use the same kinds of abstract representation for them. But in molecular biology, you're not really dealing with chemistry at all. It's all van der Waals forces and nanomachines. It's conformational changes in proteins. So it's much more about mechanics than chemistry. And from reading Dick's first book, the Hierarchical Genome book, it seems like those are the things that he needs more, is those micro-machine processes, those systems of little mousetrap games that trigger each other and changes in protein sizes and so on, because those are the things that are going to generate waves across embryos and that kind of stuff. So that's quite a different kind of chemistry to small molecule chemistry, where energies are important, or even autocatalytic sets of enzyme reactions. So you've got to get the model right at the beginning, I think, don't you?
And if I can echo that, I think there's a real problem with regards to picking an existing chemical simulation and then trying to hope to tweak it to the point where you can get this kind of emergence. And this is really a two-part problem, because following the kind of history of the Evo Grid, what Bruce did very skillfully initially was excite the artificial life community at the potential of this being a contributing project. And as it kind of moved more into artificial chemistry to kind of chemical simulations to existing chemistry simulations, trying to move it forward, I think some of that momentum is lost. And in recent parallel to the Evo Grid development, as Bruce mentioned, I've been developing this chemical automata simulation, which is relatively large quantized space, hundreds, if not thousands of atoms and compounds formed within each of these quantized cells. But as we have the benefit of William L. Buckley on the call as well, some of this chemical automata idea was really inspired by having you on Biota Live, and you're talking about Golly. Do you want to jump in here, William?
Well, what was capturing my attention on the chemistry side is the notion of how do you really simulate chemistry? Seemed to me that the fundamental operation is Brownian motion. And I don't really see that simulating the motions of molecules is going to be particularly useful to even a chemistry simulation, an artificial chemistry. I would think that some of the computations necessary to physical processes are ancillary or pointless relative to other physical processes that you'd like to model, and it depends on where you apply those computational cycles, where you apply that throughput. The ability to model a cubic centimeter of water is in part a consequence of exactly what you mean by modeling. How accurate do you need your model to be? And it seems to me that some of the discussion centers around excessive idealization of modeling every last scintilla of behavior in the natural world. And that may be some of the source of conflict in determining whether you really have the computational resources to conduct your model or not. The thing I like about cellular automata, of course, is because it's massive numbers of processors all at once. Of course, it's all implemented in simulation. It'd be nice to have a physical hardware cellular automata, something that I can tile my wall with. We'll get millions of cells in each direction, but we're not there yet. So we still have to use these von Neumann serial processors instead of a von Neumann cellular automata. But
and certainly, when we had you last on, William, you portrayed this vision of kind of a Tierra-like Evo Grid. We have the benefit of Jay Hart, Tom Ray's long-time software developer and colleague in the chat. So, can you talk a little bit about the Evo Grid idea as a vast Tierra-like simulation that you leave and just kind of peek back into occasionally to see things evolving if they're there?
Well, that would be my argument. Basically, to reiterate the talk, I have complaints regarding how much bias you put in your models. And some of that goes back to comments I got from Richard Dawkins regarding Core War. But ultimately, you'd like to have some kind of large environment in which to conduct your experiments I understand that, and I understand that that's pretty much where Bruce Damer's going, is how to create an environment of sufficient computational capacity that we can model biological or more complicated things than you see in, say, inorganic chemistry. But how you actually accomplish that is how you build those models will, in some sense, how efficiently you can do so, in some sense, is determined by exactly how much detail you wish to model. And I tend to think that, some of the notions for the BioGrid or the EvoGrid go to maybe a little bit too much length to model every last little detail of molecule motion. I don't really care that much. I don't think that it's that critical to understand the trajectory of a particular hydrogen atom. I just don't see that that's a very big, important issue in modeling living processes. I don't think you need that much detail. I think you need other kinds of things.
I think this is what the art of artificial life is all about, really. If you look back to Chris Langton's original definition of artificial life, about what is it, life as it is in the context of life as it could be.
Life as it might be. Yeah.
Yeah. The purpose of a life is to figure out the model, is to work out what are the necessary components of any abstract model of life that actually come up with the goods and produce the right emergent properties. And I think that probably applies here in EvoGrid too, that this discussion about what the model should be is the art of the whole process.
I'll agree with that. That's true.
And jumping in here a bit, because I'm hoping that Peter Newman is either
he's in the chat.
He's in the chat. Wonderful. Peter, you're welcome to join in defense of our approach. Just a comment. I'm heading in October to the Flint lab. I'm going to see Steen Rasmussen, Harold Fellerman, and Martin Hanzig again. We're actually sitting down and looking at a track that's planned for Artificial Life 12 that's on this very subject, exactly this very subject, the modeling of emergence, whether it be chemistry-inspired or abstract or whatnot. An actual theme for A Life 12, which I'm hoping that will grow into a standalone event at some point. And I know Dick Gordon would certainly like to make that Biota 5, that emerge into Biota 5, maybe in Winnipeg, subsequent year, 2011. So I know what's going to happen. I'm going to get a tremendous amount of pull by people who are in the lab trying to make things happen in chemistry, a tremendous pull back saying, look, we can observe things in chemistry that are happening that are computational, such as the formation of membranes. Can you please give us the best tool that will help shine the light in the darkness? And they're going to be coming back. And so both of you are right. I mean, all three of you are right. It's a dance between, do we model the movement of every hydrogen atom, or do we do something really abstract that a chemist would sort of look at and blink and say, well, it's all well and good, but I can't use that in day-to-day work. What Steen said was interesting. He said the first phase of soft A life, in Mark Badeau's definition of soft, wet, and hard, the first phase really was doing these abstract toy universes. And Steen basically switched his career to do the Flint project and to do the proto-life work, to go back into chemistry and say we have to go back to basics and we have to really look at how life might have emerged. We have one data point, and we need to do the software side of it. And when I went to see him last February, he said, oh my God, this is exactly what our field needs, is this kind of work, even if it's rudimentary, even if it's just a start. Just give us some tool like this that will really help shine that torch into the darkness for us here in the chemical wing of things.
Do you feel you're developing a tool, though, Bruce? I mean, this has been a kind of continuous narrative in parallel to the EvoGrid, the idea of summoning the EvoGrid. And we have Luke Johnson in the chat, who I spoke with on last Biota Live. He's an Australian roboticist who's interested in calling in and talking to you in particular, Steve. But the discussion that I had with Luke was that every artificial life developer that has had some contact with the EvoGrid has their own particular idea, and what I'm trying to do with the chemical automata simulation is say the principles behind these things, as William noted as well, are relatively simple. We can all kind of cast our own ideas in software. We all have this ability because we've developed artificial life in the past. Why not actually create a number of these simulations in parallel that could all answer various components of the EvoGrid-related challenge and create a kind of plurality of solutions that, maybe the biologists like, maybe the chemists like, maybe the science fiction authors like. I mean, maybe all these groups can be agreeable to at least one of the simulations that are generated. But that way, the artificial life community, in terms of, folks have been developing this stuff as Steve has for, 2 decades, can utilize this amazing collective knowledge to create a series of projects. I mean, what do you think about that, Bruce?
Oh, you've absolutely pegged it. You've hit the golf ball to the 9-yard line, or whatever analogy you could come up with. In fact, there should be a plurality of approaches. It will be all a richer effort. And what I think Peter and I are trying to do with this first thing we're calling an EvoGrid is saying, hey guys, it all seems to come down to if we want things to emerge, then we're running a black box somewhere, and the black box is running a huge amount of computation, and you can't visualize it all, and you can't, with the human-aided eye, look at it. But what you can do is build these artificial eyes that are distributed on many, many computing systems to look for interesting stuff. And if you find interesting stuff, you could flag it and the human eye could look at it, or you could decide to drive the simulator in some manner. And I think it's the EvoGrid technique. It's that very technique, which is like SETI at home. It's derivative of SETI at home, but it actually has a feedback mechanism to try to generate more interesting stuff in the simulation. So the EvoGrid at a meta level is publishing and promoting an approach to doing this kind of thing.
Could you, Bruce, have a meta model, actually have an infrastructure for producing chemical models of various kinds, so you've got some kind of common software that could be used as a tool from all? Because it strikes me that if you're not careful, you'll not be able to please all of the people, and you'll end up having to write billions of lines of code because everyone wants fundamentally different models. And it may be that there's some kind of common theme to all possible models of chemistry, and that you can come up with an abstraction in the same way as Turing came up with the universal Turing machine as a kind of abstraction of all possible machines. And maybe you can do that with chemistry too, that there's a common underlying meta model for chemistry from which you can then make experimental abstract chemistries and compete them with each other, and find out which ones produce the most emergent results.
Yeah, that actually is crisply stated. That in fact, I've just reread a biography of Turing to try to understand the environment of the late 1930s when he was promoting the idea of mathematical machines. And you're exactly right. I mean, in a sense, there's almost a mathematical model that's called for, sort of distributed, large-scale, emergent simulation with analysis of bits and pieces of that simulation space. So it could contain Williams automata. It could contain chemical automata that Tom is talking about. It could contain bouncing pieces of geometry, a polygonal chemistry, a polygonal universe. It really could be anything, but it will always perhaps be a giant Turing machine that is running and generating a huge amount of stuff to look at, and then there will be little Turing machines reading those tapes and looking for patterns. And maybe that's it, in its simplest terms, what EvoGrids are.
It's an interesting parallel with neural networks and neuroscience, I think, because if you look at a real brain and real neurons, I mean, a single real neuron is an incredibly complex machine with dozens of different external chemicals, hundreds of different genes being involved in the synaptic changes and so on. So if you're trying to write the the recipe for a single neuron. You'd have something with maybe 10,000 variables in it. And the trouble is we don't know which of those 10,000 variables is relevant to actually thinking. We don't know which ones are necessary and which ones are just a consequence of Earth biology and are just there to make the whole system work, like the sort of valves and pipes that run around a jet engine. And so what happened way back in the early days of AI was that the connectionists thought, oh, well, a neuron must be a machine that sums its inputs. And so sum of products became the basis for connectionism, and almost all of connectionism has grown out of that. But it's wrong. I mean, real neurons aren't simple sum of products devices, and there's almost certainly a lot of variables in real neurons turn out to be far more important than people gave them credit for. And this is a similar thing that William was saying, that there's a hell of a lot of variables in chemistry, and we don't know which ones are relevant and which ones can be ignored. But that is what artificial life is there for, is trying to establish these things, trying to figure out which are the crucial variables, which ones are necessary for all chemistries.
And I think jumping in here, there's one measure, one wonderful measure. If we define what we want to come out of these black boxes, these Evo grids, and we start seeing the stuff, the behavior, the structures emerging, it's what you're looking for. It's not trying to characterize or model the entire universe that you've decided to create. It's actually, does it produce? Does it come up with the things that you think of as emergent complexity or structures or behaviors, etc.? The proof is in the pudding, in the sense, in the eating.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a hierarchical thing too. You don't necessarily have to wait until ribosomes form or whole cells form or anything like that. You can look at your protochemistries, your candidate chemical models, and look for simple things like the beginnings of membrane formation and conformational changes in molecules and ion channel type behavior, and so there are relatively simple properties that you could detect to find out whether your model of chemistry shows some signs of being on the right lines. And maybe you could do some of those early tests before you sort of let the thing loose on the bigger stuff.
So just before we round out this topic, Steve, has Bruce been able to convince you? Are you a convert to the Evo grid?
Oh, well, I was never a naysayer to the concept. I love the concept. I mean, that's what we're all trying to do in artificial life, is come up with the minimal system to produce the maximal complexity. And Evo grid's a great start. It's my only concerns were whether you'd all been able to think through some of these essentially philosophical issues about what classes of chemistry are necessary, which properties are necessary and sufficient, and whether you might end up writing hundreds of thousands of lines of code and going down the wrong road. So that was my only concern. But I think the project is a great idea, and I'm all for it.
And has this concern been resolved this evening?
Yeah, it seems like you've been thinking about it. I still think there's a long way to go. And one of the things that we haven't talked about that I'd like to be convinced a bit about was this notion of machines for detecting interesting things. You know, the pattern detectors that say, oh, look over here, something good is going on. Because that's actually a pretty demanding problem in AI terms. How do you detect what an interesting thing looks like? I mean, it's hard enough to get a pattern detecting system to recognize a capital A, let alone something interesting and biological, you know? So that would worry me a bit. Maybe you're glossing over some of the difficulties there.
Yes, I'm writing a book chapter on exactly that topic currently. How one searches through this algorithmic soup and actually finds things of interest. So I think it's something that the community is considering quite seriously currently, Steve, even if it isn't being actively talked about. Steve, it's a real luxury to have you on Biota Live. It's been almost 2 years exactly since you last appeared on a Biota podcast. In terms of the past 2 years, I mean, Bruce mentioned your blog. Recently, I saw a brief image of a game which I don't believe you're still developing, but the idea was a genotype-phenotype swimming game. Can you talk a little bit about that development?
Yeah, sure. I feel a bit embarrassed about it all because I got it to alpha and then decided I didn't like it anymore and gave up writing it. I've had a bit of a turbulent few years personally, and so that kind of got in the way of development. But the game was called Symbiosis, and the idea actually goes back to 1979 when I first started writing it. Computers were a bit slower in those days. But the idea was to produce a minimal Lego set of cell types, and allow people to just plug them together to make circuits of cells that can do something interesting, in other words, organisms. So, because by the time I actually got around to writing this properly, we were into 3D, and so I could do this in a much more interesting way in proper 3D. So I came up with a scheme for producing libraries of cell type sensors, computational cells, and actuators. And you could just plug these things together to make simple creatures, rather like Breitenberg vehicles, but arbitrarily complex. And the idea was just to build ecosystems of these things that could eat each other and parasitize each other and so on. It was good fun. I enjoyed it, writing it, but it turned out to be a little bit complex, and I thought the learning curve was maybe a bit too steep for a commercial game.
So I'm not sure if you followed the narrative in Biota Live, but certainly Jeffrey Ventrella, in terms of swimmers, has a long background in terms of writing swimmer games and these kind of underlying ideas. And recently I've been working with Jeffrey, moving some of his fundamental simulations into open source. We're yet to get GenePool open source, but certainly there's a project within the next 6 or so months to actually do that. In terms of this game itself, do you think it's something that you'll return to, or is this something that you would consider moving open source?
Well, I don't have the time to manage an open source project, but I could give away my source code, I guess, but it would be a bit opaque. It's a thing I'd like to return to at some stage. It's somewhat different from Jeffrey's work. For a start, evolution wasn't really relevant to it, although the creatures were genetically coded, they're quite complex. What I was interested in getting really was the equivalent of electronics for cell biology. In electronics, you've got a reasonably small number of basic components that you can plug together into arbitrarily complex circuits to make things that do really clever stuff. And that's what I was playing with symbiosis cells. And I really enjoyed the process of thinking that through, trying to find a mechanism for getting any cell to plug into any other cell and still do something useful without any kind of interface problems and so on. So it's something I'd like to come back to, but it turned into quite a complex piece of code. And I don't know that it's much use trying to put it out there for other people to play with.
Are you familiar with FramSticks at all? Because that seems to have at least veins into what you're talking about.
Yeah, it's related to FramSticks, but again, it's more complex. From what I remember of FramSticks, and I haven't seen that for many years now, there's a relatively small number of building block types. But here I was talking about, maybe 100 different kinds of building block, with more emphasis on the computational complexity of cells, on the things they can do to modulate cell signals, rather than just on the input-output side, on the actuators and sensors side.
Yes, I was going to ask you about that. I mean, whether they were, obviously you say 100 or what have you, but obviously they're categorized into groups, surely, of different kinds of things.
The categorization was kind of evolving. That was what was interesting for me, personally, trying to design this thing. First of all, I had to come up with some kind of scheme for how cells can talk to each other so that A can connect to B, even though A doesn't know what B is for. and the result does something useful. And that went through an evolution of about 4 different mechanisms for how to connect cells together. And obviously there was a basic differentiation between sensors, actuators, and the stuff that goes in between the two, computational cells of various kinds. But gradually, as I was working through this, I keep on designing new cell types and thinking, oh, that would be useful. And then I discovered that it was very similar to 2 other cell types I had already made, and if I threw them all away and started again, I could come up with one cell type that contained a more generalized mechanism. Like a lot of the stuff, I started using computing on surfaces, two-dimensional graphs, essentially, mathematical surfaces that could be used by modulating the surface. You could produce integrators and differentiators and comparators and all sorts of basic computational elements out of the same thing. So I went through this process of starting out trying to build cells that I thought I needed, and then seeing similarities between them that allowed me to develop sort of meta cells, rather like we were talking about just now with the chemical simulator, and finding more basic building blocks.
So this is almost the idea of kinetics evolving into kind of a nervous system internally as well. Is that what I'm hearing?
A nervous system inside the cells, you mean?
Well, no. I mean, if you start with cell primitives, that they have movement and these kind of elements, the communication of this movement through their membranes can actually form a kind of gestalt intelligence over these kind of walkers or swimmers or what have you.
I'm not sure I understand the question, Tom. Sorry.
So what you were describing was actually kind of starting out with a number of building blocks and then moving them together, but then actually looking at kind of structural elements. And as these structural elements put themselves together, my understanding was that what came through this was communications and almost a kind of group intelligence of the cells as they were together. Am I right in that interpretation?
Oh, yes, I think so. I think that was the whole point, was the gestalt, the way that the whole was more than the sum of its parts, which is, of course, what we're all about. The basic model I had in my mind for it all was analog computation. So it's very undigital, the whole thing. So my basic elements started out as things like integrators, differentiators, comparators, because those are the basic building blocks for an analog computer. And but I was always trying to keep them quite biological as well. So I didn't have the level of granularity wasn't at the level of neurons. It was somewhat higher than that, and it's a bit hard to explain. You really have to kind of look at it to see what I was getting to.
So in terms of the source code kind of sitting, waiting for your interest to spark in the future, could you see a model where you moved it open source for other developers to maintain and you then return? I think in particular the Creatures Wiki. I mean, this is fundamentally kind of, your original ideas being taken and moving in open source directions, and then you coming back sporadically to kind of, talk to the gathered masses, so to speak. I mean, do you feel that this simulation could have a similar, similar existence in an open source community?
Well, it's possible if people can understand my code. There's an awful lot of it. It's reasonably well commented, but I wouldn't want. I have no income. I can't afford to devote much time to documenting source code for a project I'm not working on.
Certainly. But I think there's an existing community, and certainly I'm feeling this with regards to Jeffrey Ventrella's work. Jeffrey comments very slightly, but doesn't really comment a lot. And a lot of the structure, as you read his code, comes through other things and, staring at and reflecting for a few days. So, his source code is probably slightly more extreme, maybe, than what you're describing with yours, and yet there is a community that's obviously very excited by Jeffrey's work, as there's obviously probably an even larger community that's very excited by your work and would certainly easily be able to take this project on without, disturbing you as you develop your next project. Is this something that, you could see yourself doing?
Well, it's possible, Tom, yeah. I hadn't really thought about it much, but it's a shame to waste, certainly. And I do comment heavily. I write more comments than I do code. So it's explicable in that sense. but it's also rather more complex than most AI simulators, so there's quite a lot of it. One of the reasons I stopped doing it was that it's written in C# and on Managed DirectX, and Managed DirectX is obsolete now. So from a commercial perspective, it wasn't a good idea. I'd had to convert it to XNA, and I just couldn't be fussed, to be honest. But I tell you what, I'll send you the source code, and you see what you can make of it.
Very good.
And tell
You've
me
heard it on Biota Live first, people. The Steve Grand fan base will be emailing me, no doubt, as soon as this goes live. So, Steve, are you in a position where you can talk about your current project at all?
No, I wish I could, but I don't have a current project. I gave up the symbiosis one just because, from a commercial perspective, it didn't seem the right thing to be doing, because my life has changed somewhat lately. And so what I was going to do was write another Creatures, essentially, because it's, 17 years since I started writing Creatures now, and computers are 100 times faster, and they've got 3D and all this other stuff that didn't exist before. And I learned an awful lot of biology and so on. So what I wanted to do was create another simulation similar in concept to Creatures, just a bunch of living things that people go off and explore and understand and interact with. I was going to base it on a hypothetical moon surrounding a planet somewhere, and so this moon has been discovered, and it had life forms on it of many species, and the user's job was to just go and explore the moon and find out what they could about these creatures, how they worked, take them apart, try to teach them things, try to contact the more intelligent ones and so on, which is a project I'd still like to do. But when I realized how much work was involved, I realized that my money was going to run out before I managed to complete the code, and so I've shelved it for a bit, and I'm going to write a book instead.
Very good.
But I just don't know what yet.
Well, the need for books is, a current topic. In fact, it was something I was going to raise in the news and notes, because I've been contacted with regards to 2 separate books currently, and I'm writing chapters furiously accordingly. I think this is really the time, as the economy, dives down, that we can kind of, rather than bunker down. I had some correspondence with Bruce, I think yesterday, associated with what the artificial life community was going to do. Now, such a large number of our colleagues were either unemployed or underemployed, and I said that I thought, the artificial life community had learnt from certainly what happened in the mid to late 90s, and we'd probably all find different ways to maintain productive goals. And certainly I'm going to be maintaining Biota Live for as long as they'll give me a phone line and a computer. But Bruce, as you listen in with regards to this, I mean, you have Steve Grand on the line. What would you like to see Steve Grand write a book about?
Well, gosh, that's a tall order. I think just his philosophy of life, and maybe his philosophy or approach to the future of humanity. And as a guide, how does Steve Grand see us being able to survive as a species? Wow,
thank you, Bruce.
The big question.
That down. If Bruce thinks it's a good idea, then it's a good idea. It's that's quite possibly what I will write about. One of my possible topics is a book called Machines Like Us, which is based on a talk I gave a long time ago about human beings as machines and what that implies for us as a species and how we think of ourselves and questions of morality and so on. Or I might write a book about existence and how the universe comes into being, and how systems self-organize. But I'm playing around with them. Something that did occur to me to say tonight while I'm on is that we really need to get our act together with AI, with artificial life. I just wrote the article on artificial life for Britannica, Encyclopedia Britannica. And do you know that this is the first time we've had one? There wasn't an article on artificial life in Britannica until now. And they gave me 1,000 words, which is not very much. And AI got 12,000 words.
Gosh.
And I think since AI is a subset of artificial life, I think we really need to redress that balance. Okay?
Does Britannica still matter, though?
It's still an important reference tool, yes, because it's citable in a way that Wikipedia often isn't. Wikipedia obviously has got a decent article on artificial life.
A lot of that is changing with regard to Wikipedia.
That's true, yeah.
Its acceptability is rapidly improving.
But it's either way, I think an article on A-Life really ought to be longer than an article on AI, since the one is a subset of the other.
Well, that's one way to look at it. But in terms of Wikipedia versus Britannica, there really is a big rivalry between the two. I admit to being a little bit biased because I do edit some of Wikipedia myself, but in general, the quality of the articles are really very, very good. There's occasionally some problems with details, and you do need to check what's printed there. But I think that the Wikipedia is rapidly becoming the encyclopedia of choice.
Oh, I agree. I wouldn't dispute that. I mean, it's the first place I go to look anything up. I'm sure that's the truth for most people in the world.
There's 3 million articles in it, and some of them are drivel, but there's an awful lot of good material there.
Well, I mean, I've had the fellow who edited the Artificial Life entry on Wikipedia on. In fact, it's probably the most downloaded Biota podcast out there because I actually attached it to the Wikipedia Artificial Life article. But I mean, certainly he considered the topic as something that was so ballooning and almost quite overwhelming that I think he's actually put down the active writing of the artificial life topic. Steve, in 5 sentences, can you summarize your entry with regards to artificial life?
Too much evolution. That was my conclusion. There's very little you can say in 1,000 words. So I tried to explain that the whole point is Chris Langton's original plan. We don't understand what's necessary and what's just a mess in biology. So A-Life is a way of abstracting it out and working out what the principles of biology are. And then I talked a bit about some of the techniques they use, like genetic algorithms and so on. And
so in terms of the usual suspects, what names were attached to artificial life?
Oh, I only named one person, and that was Chris.
Right.
There wasn't space for citations. Sorry, I didn't want to make it too detailed in any case, because there were philosophical questions about artificial life that you need to get across to the public.
Yes, I think that was the problem with the Wikipedia entry on artificial life was it became too technical and then avoided philosophy and then shot back the other way and then it became a list of names and now it's really just a skeleton. I mean, there's no real information there aside from a series of links.
Let me
the most you can hope to do in a 1,000-word encyclopedia article is pique people's interest and get them to look further. So you need to stick to the generalities, I think. For a short article, Wikipedia is different because it can have as long an article as you like. Somehow things are easier to read when they're on screen. But I wanted to talk a bit about the difference between hard and soft A-Life, and are these things really alive or not, and other sort of ontological questions.
Yes, I put back to the Dawkins editors on Wikipedia that actually my facts were wrong. I thought his reference associated with artificial life had been expunged, but using various tracking techniques, I couldn't actually find the original Dawkins article. I think it had been connected to the A-Life article as these things occur. But I mean, in terms of the Chris Langton, obviously, but in terms of Tom Ray, Geoffrey Ventrella was an interesting case because his article was expunged from Wikipedia on 3 separate occasions. I was called in to provide a reference. You've maintained a relatively small article on Wikipedia, Steve, but it doesn't, I mean, you need to go to the Creatures Wiki to get any real information. In terms of, folks maintaining the artificial life entry on Wikipedia, what do you think should be there?
Oh, that's a good question. Well, it maybe needs pointing to lots of other articles. We can do with articles on genetic algorithms and L systems and some of the basic techniques that are common to A-Life. and some history of the folk involved. I mean, particularly that first generation of pioneers. I haven't looked at the A-Life article for a long time, to tell the truth. Historically speaking, that's not an easy way to track the subject because nothing much has changed over the last decade.
Ooh, now there's a contentious topic for potentially a future Biota Live that we'll get you back on, Steve, I think.
All right, and I'll say this then. There's too much evolution in A-Life. We'll have a Biota Live on that sometime.
So we have the benefit of having Luke Johnson, a.k.a. Tulkus, on from Australia. He's a roboticist who we had on the last Biota Live. And Steve, I think he has a couple of robotics A-Life-related questions for you. Hello, Tulkus.
Hey, how you going, Tom? You got to mention I'm a hobbyist. It sounds a bit
Certainly.
normal. I had a look at Steve's work. I'm going to order his book, The Growing Up with AI, quite soon. I'm actually interested in doing basically very similar to what he does, experiment with mixing AI and artificial life together with robots and the human interactive robots. So I've probably got too many questions to ask. I've actually gone back to what you were talking about before with the chemical simulations and the Brownian motion. I think that the chemical simulations could be used as a reference, like a litmus test, so that you could then test all the other processes that are included in evolution of life.
Sorry, I'm not sure I followed that. You're suggesting that. Can you say that again?
Sure. Rather like you were talking before about the focus being on the chemical simulations as being the major part of the Evo grid, and talking about there being so many other processes that are crucial to evolution and self-assembly and Brownian motion. All these things we've got a lot of data on chemical simulations and a lot of chemicals and all the biology, so we could use all that data as a reference, so that when you run a simulation, you get to a point where you say, well, this works with our chemical simulation. Okay, we're not running the chemical simulation in this simulation, but we have the same result. That's basically the point I'm trying to make.
Right, yes. Definitely the whole point is trying to get the result with the minimal input. It's difficult because since we don't know all of the processes of evolution and cell formation and morphogenesis and so on, and since we don't know all of the processes of chemistry either, there's going to be a hunting problem where you don't know whether your model is wrong or the data you're testing the model against is wrong. It's going to be very suck it and see, I think. But this is what the process of artificial life is. It's synthetic science. The whole point is not to do analysis, but to do synthesis and try these things out and see if they work, and learn from that process. And I really hope it works out for the Evo grid too.
So if I can ask a robotics A-Life question, what can the artificial life community learn from the robotics community, Steve?
There's a series of conferences. I don't know whether it's still going. SAB. Is SAB still going? Do you know, Tom? The simulation of adaptive behaviour?
I'm not sure.
I haven't been to one for some years, but that conference circuit has been going for as long as A-Life and ECAL, the European Conference on Artificial Life, and it's kind of halfway between robotics and A-Life. The people in SAB tend to build insect robots, and so they're interested in real biology. They're interested in how do cataglyphics of desert ants navigate, that kind of question. How do real animals solve real problems? And they use robotics to do that. So there already is a kind of sub-community of somewhere between robotics and A-Life where they build a lot of insect and invertebrate robots. And it's quite a healthy community. In many ways, it's a more healthy community than the pure A-Life community is.
And is it a hobbyist community as well, or is it purely academic?
It's largely academic. And what's the name of the guy who does insect robots that he sells? Mark something.
Mark Tilden.
Tilden, that's it. Yeah. So there's his little robots that kind of tap into the hobbyist community in the same vein, but the SAB conferences are quite high level academic papers and heavy duty stuff. So there's not much.
Adding something here just for your curiosity, Steve. My day job, or one of my day jobs, is doing high fidelity physics-based robot rover simulation for NASA. And I was developing that shortly after we did Biota 2 and Biota 3, and it blossomed into 10 years of work that Peter Newman and Ryan and a bunch of us have been doing. And what's interesting is we're currently in a proposals phase for a new bunch of work for NASA next year on connecting real field test rovers, planetary rovers, in a common service-oriented architecture into a 3D simulator, our 3D simulator. And what's interesting for me is, as you're describing it, is I in a sense, I'm now living at the two ends of the spectrum. I'm living in robot simulation, and I'm living in chemical simulation, at least intellectually now. And maybe they can be brought together.
I never thought you would leave the virtual world, Bruce, and come into reality. Welcome to reality.
No fear of that.
It's just the rest of us that feel like we live in a virtual world. But moving from my discussion with Tolkis last Biota Live, I mean, Tolkis and I were kind of brainstorming the possibilities, and particularly you've touched on the kind of hobbyist robotics, small companies selling components into the robotics community, Steve, and Tolkis was also mentioning that last Biota Live. Do you think there's a model for the artificial life community where we form small companies and create some form of product that, robotics hobbyists could use?
You mean hardware product?
Possibly software, possibly hardware.
Yeah, it's the hobby robotics business is a very, very tough business. Not many people survive long in it, and they don't make a great deal of money if they do. So it's not an easy world to make a living in. But then that's partly because most of the companies that end up serving the hobby robotics market are engineers, and so they come from the perspective of servos and motors and control boards, and even sensors are a bit off their normal path. And there aren't many people who are involved in the robotics world who come at it from the AI perspective, and certainly not the artificial life perspective. So there's certainly scope, I would have thought, the market there for artificial creatures as opposed to standard platform three-wheel robots. And there are people out there who would avidly buy such things if you can make them cheap enough.
And in terms of it being a kind of after-hours project, not the day job, I mean, do you think there's a model that the artificial life community could move to in terms of either selling small bits of hardware or software for the robotics community? Is that more a possibility?
You mean components for the robotics community as opposed to fully-fledged robots?
Well, yes, exactly.
Could be. If you can use them, what's lacking, I think, in that interface between robot hobbyists, the general public, and robot builders, is ingenuity. There's not a great deal of ingenuity involved, not a lot of lateral thinking. It all tends to be quite straightforward engineering. The sensors tend to be dumb and uninteresting sensors. And anyone who works in artificial life soon discovers how ingenious biology is and how different a retina is from a camera, how different a touch sensor in a living thing is from a whisker sensor on a robot, and how much computation goes into even these quite basic elements of robotics. So I'm sure there's scope for adding the ingenuity, value-added stuff where the insights we have in artificial life could turn dull electronics into more interesting modules. The symbiosis project that I've stopped doing, and I'll send you the source code for, when I originally started doing it in 1979, it was in software. And then I realized that computers weren't smart enough, fast enough. And so in the middle, well, just after Creatures, I guess, I started doing the same thing in hardware. I got some funding to build physical cells that you could plug together in arbitrary combinations, and they were sensors and actuators and computational devices. And there's definitely scope for someone to build a kind of robotics toolkit like that, where there's an elegance in the architecture that means you can produce a huge variety of robots from a relatively small Lego set of building blocks.
Yes, I thought initially you were really describing a kind of return to us writing books for the robotics community, but I think this is a very interesting idea, and particularly Tolka says, I plan on moving Steve's Symbiosis open source relatively soon. I mean, as you listen in, does that sound like something that could benefit the robotics community, the hobbyist robotics community in particular?
Definitely. There's a bit of research. I think it's Robert Foole's lab in the States. They're trying to work on like having a black box where you can just attach sensors and motors and use basically have an adaptive design so that you can experiment and prototype with as many different forms as you want. And that's something that if hobbyists could have, that and as you say, there's not a lot of hobbyists that have got the AI perspective. So if you can take out a lot of that from the equation, it would enable a lot cooler robots coming out of the hobby sector, and they would buy that as a product, like a chip or a board. But I think also even just software modules. If you had a software module that you could then attach, not necessarily a whole package that includes the board and the software. Just the software alone could be a product. And also I think Xbox Live could be a good market where you make a game. There's millions of people out there that'll pay $10 for an artificial life game and play it at home in their lounge room.
Is that something you thought about, Steve?
What, writing an Xbox game?
Yes.
Certainly the game I started writing that I've shelved while I write a book is based on XNA for its 3D code, and so that can port to Xbox pretty easily. Although the Xbox market and the PC market are very different kinds of people think about things in different ways, and so probably an A-Life game that worked well on Xbox would be quite different from a game that would work well on PC, I think. It has to be a bit more action-oriented.
I think I play Live myself, and I think across Live you get a very big cross-section. Look, unfortunately there's a lot of young kids that act like idiots in this virtual world, but there's people from all demographics, and I think parents want something that they can say is more educational for their kids. So that's something that, could be a selling point.
Yeah, well, that's true. The educational possibilities for artificial life projects are huge because the whole point of A-Life is that it's abstract biology, so it's a great way of teaching people the fundamentals of biological systems in a nice, entertaining and friendly way because it's so much less messy than real pets, for example. There's a lot of scope. I think to some extent we don't have the technology or the philosophy yet. We haven't actually done our own science well enough to do the really interesting things commercially, but there is a market out there. I mean, my Creatures game, I think in total sold 2 million copies. I wish I'd got the money for it, but it demonstrated that there is a huge market out there for people who are interested in what life is, and that's what we're all interested in. What is life? What does it mean? And also, when I was writing Creatures all those millions of years ago, it would have taken a fifth of the time to write if it weren't for marketing departments, because I spent most of my time fighting about the design because everyone kept telling me that people aren't interested in science and I should hide all the science crap. And I think the Creatures community proved them completely wrong, that there are certainly 2 million people out there who are very interested in science, and the the skill that was put into trying to understand the creature's genome and do experiments on these little neurons was just mind-blowing. Kids were doing really quite advanced science, and it was quite impressive. So there's a market out there. There's a thirst for it. Everyone wants to know what life is. Everyone wants to understand what consciousness is. Everyone gets easily attached to living things, and somebody somewhere can make some money out of it, I'm sure. Just won't be me, I bet.
Certainly watching Will Wright's discussion of Spore, I think there's certainly, seems to be similarly perturbed by not only a marketing but also a legal department associated with what Spore ended up being. But interestingly, Genova Chen's interpretation of Jeffrey Ventrella's work in Flow proved that you can actually have artificial life or artificial life-like simulations on consoles. I mean, it was a success on the PlayStation 3, although not on Xbox necessarily. Steve, it has been absolutely wonderful having you on Biota Live, and I mean, I think we've introduced the format to you. Do you think you would be interested in participating in potential future Biota Lives?
Oh, sure, you've sucked me in there, Tom. I've stayed away from it because my life has been complicated, and I haven't had the brain power to think about it. But you're interesting bunch of guys, and yeah, I'll be back.
And we do get a random smattering on, although Bruce is a regular and William is a regular in the chat, and as is Tulkas. We do get an interesting group on, so you're never really sure who might actually be calling in on a Friday night.
Well, I'll be back. I'll try and say something provocative to wind everybody up.
Wonderful. Well, artificial life hasn't done anything in the past decade. I think is probably going to be the topic that you're on next time on Biota Live. Bruce,
sure thing.
Bruce, you're going to be travelling in the near future. Do you have any final questions for Steve?
Are you settled down in Flagstaff, Steve?
I'm settled for the next year, definitely. I should be around. This is a beautiful place. I love Flagstaff. It's really nice. So, yeah, I'll be here for a year. Now, I'm not all that far from you, I guess, now. A couple of days' drive. And maybe we'll meet up.
It'd be lovely to see you. And Reed Reiner at Northern Arizona University is in Flagstaff. He's one of the early founders of the Contact Consortium and an anthropologist, a virtual world anthropologist.
Oh, sure. I'll look him up. Can you say his name again?
Reed Reiner. I'll send you a contact.
Oh, great. Thank you.
And perhaps you both could meet in Las Vegas sometime in the near future.
It's in the middle.
Well, it's not really in the middle for Bruce, but it is if he gets on a jet plane. So, well, I'd like to thank all the folks for participating this evening. The chat has been on fire. We've had collaborative projects discussed and sealed and emails sent and a wide variety of things going on in the chat this evening in parallel to our discussions. So once again, Steve, I mean, thank you for participating, and certainly you bring a large posse in terms of those that are interested in your work. So it's wonderful to have you on.
Oh, you're welcome, Tom.
And our topic on next Biota Live, September the 4th, post-singular and post-apocalyptic, something slightly different than this evening's discussion. But no doubt we'll have an interesting group of callers. Perhaps Steve might call back and put forward the thought that artificial life hasn't done anything in the past 10 years. That would certainly get the conversation post-apocalyptic relatively quickly, I would presume. But anyway, thank you all very much for listening in. Good night.
Good night.
Yeah,
Good night.